This week, Prisoner of Tehran, the gripping story of one woman's journey to personal hell and back. She cheated death in Iran's worst prison and survived to bring the world her compelling story, now a bestseller and soon a movie. My conversation with writer Marina Nemat. And Dangerous Assignment, why the kidnapping of a BBC reporter in Gaza has caused the world's journalists to protest. Hello, I'm Brian Stewart. Welcome to Our World. The Iranian Revolution that shook the world happened 27 years ago, but many say it's still not over. When the radical leader Ayatollah Khomeini came to power in 1979, establishing an Islamic republic and toppling the monarchy led by the Shah, he ended Iran's pro-Western orientation. The current president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, carries on this legacy, and the West watches uneasily as Iran assumes its new place as a dominant power in the Middle East, one with the potential of nuclear capability. Marina Nemat came of age during the revolution in 1979. She was just a teenager, but already had a writer's acute eye. By sheer misfortune, she was caught up in the wave of arrests at the time and sent to Iran's worst political prison. She spent 2 years there and lived under the constant threat of execution. But Marina Nemat has an unusually strong spirit. She came to realize early on that she was, as she calls it, the perfect witness. She was determined to give voice to the suffering and experiences of her fellow prisoners. Marina was released from prison in the mid-1980s and later immigrated to Canada. She recently wrote a book about her life, and it's now an international bestseller and a soon-to-be-made movie. What's chilling about the book, Prisoner of Tehran, is that the world Marina describes inside the prison still exists under Iran's repressive regime. We know that because of the brutal murder there of Iranian-Canadian photographer Zahra Kazemi. Marina Nemat, as you'll see, is a remarkably brave woman. I talked to her recently about her terrifying story and about Iran today. Marina Nemat, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very curious, before your great ordeal, you were a child growing up under the Shah of Iran.
That's right.
And I wonder how clear your memories are of that period and what they mean to you looking back on them.
Oh, I remember them clearly. You know, those were the days of my happiness, of stability, of when my world actually had rules, which kept everything together. And then, you know, the revolution happened and everything just collapsed. And we had to make sense of things all over again. You know, there were no rules, there was nothing. But during the time of the Shah, life was, for me, you know, at the age that I was, because I was 13 when the revolution happened. So before that, life was innocent and it was normal.
As you entered your teens, did you feel something of an outsider? Because your grandparents had come from Russia, they fled from the Russian Revolution, and you were growing up a very devout Catholic at this stage. I mean, how much of the outsider did you have a feeling of being?
You know what, not much. At the beginning, you know, I went to a Zoroastrian school, and we had Jewish girls, Baha'i girls, Zoroastrian girls, Muslim girls. So I was just one of the crowd, you know, just a little bit different from the majority.
Marina was curious and intelligent and devoured books. Very much a typical teenager, she also had a sweetheart, a young Hungarian she met at her local church. Life was about to change, however. In 1979, Iran was on the brink of revolution. A popular movement had organized to topple the Shah's corrupt and autocratic regime. At the head of this movement was the Ayatollah Khomeini, a religious leader who sought to create an Islamic republic. Soon after the Ayatollah assumed power, the new regime began to eliminate any opposition. Thousands of people were arrested and many executed. Marina's school principal put her on the blacklist for being critical of the regime. Eventually, on a late winter night, Revolutionary Guards came knocking on her door. And then comes the part of the story that is almost like a classic 20th century horror, Kafkaesque arrest under a dictatorship. At the age of 16, you're wrenched from your family, picked up by religious police, and driven off to one of the most notorious prisons. It's just hard to imagine how a 16-year-old takes that. Could you talk us through that?
I was absolutely in shock. So I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel any fear. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel happy. I was just simply numb. I felt nothing. And I think if I had been 30 years old, I would have been much more afraid, because then I understood. I would have understood what was going to happen next. But here, everything was blank.
She, along with some of her friends, was taken to the notorious Evin prison in Tehran. When it begins, the torture, the abuse of yourself, you're tied down and they begin to lash your bare feet. And you describe it as a pain beyond anything you had experienced or you could even imagine before. How psychologically devastating is the element of the act of being tortured?
When you go through something like that, it destroys everything you ever believed to be. It destroys all boundaries. You realize that you don't have any power at all. Like the sense of helplessness it creates in you and around you just entirely changes you. And especially because I was not dedicated to any political ideology, so I wasn't there protecting anything. I was just there in the situation. And the realization that I would have done anything to stop it.
Inside the political prison, there's the effort to make the prisoner believe he's been abandoned or she has been completely abandoned by the world. You get that sense of being totally cut off, without hope forever upon ever.
Entirely. And that's the only way to survive in a political prison. Evin was a land in between.
That's the prison, the name of the prison.
Yes, the name of the prison. It was a land in between. Once you entered there, you were not on planet Earth anymore. You were somewhere else. You were in a different universe where everything was different. And you suddenly felt that your connection with the world had been severed. And then later, when I was gradually moved to the dorm with the other girls, I think what we did for each other was that there was no future. We had no future. We only had the present and the past. The present was really difficult and painful. So what we did, we sat together and we talked about our lives the way it was before we had been arrested. We shared our memories of our families, of our lives. And I think by sharing them, we made sure that our memories were real, that we actually did have a life before, and that this life was somehow going to be there after.
And then when you're really going to be close to being executed, disappeared, done away with altogether, the remarkable thing happens that your life is saved by one of your torturers, Ali, who has fallen in love with you and wants to marry you. Could you talk us through this extraordinary happening?